Maritime Made is presented by Nova Scotia Business Inc., helping businesses across the province grow through export. For more information, novascotiabusiness.com.
Pottery is an age-old art form that dates back many thousands of years. Although pottery was originally used for food and water, modern-day potters can make anything from mugs to shaving scuttles. In fact, Sara Bonnyman Pottery in Tatamagouche, Nova Scotia, is world-famous for her moss scuttle, a unique and very practical shaving tool that's cherished by shaving aficionados the world over. The first and perhaps most important part of any piece of pottery is the selection of clay. Sara's clay is a customized mixture of many different varieties and is shipped to Tatamagouche from Ohio. The clay arrives in 50-pound boxes and is shipped 3 to 4 tons at a time. This potter goes through a lot of clay, about 40 to 75 pounds a day. Before the potter can work her magic, the clay needs to be run through a pug mill. The pug mill is a motorized auger that slowly pushes the clay through a vacuum pump that squeezes the air out of the clay. Air that may be trapped in the clay can cause havoc when the clay is fired. The clay leaves the pug mill in a large sausage shape. It's now ready to be cut to length using a long piece of wire. Your average potter may measure each piece to match the item being created. Sara has many years of experience and is able to measure by eye. Most of the pottery at Sara Bonnyman Pottery is produced on the potter's wheel, which was invented in Mesopotamia sometime between 6000 and 4000 BC. The potter straddles the electric wheel and uses a foot pedal to control the speed of the wheel's rotation. Mugs are a very popular piece of pottery. Here, the potter is making a stress mug. First, she places an unglazed tile on the wheel. This will be used to move the wet clay object from the wheel to the drying rack. A pre-cut piece of clay is thrown onto the center of the wheel and slowly worked by hand. The object is to ensure the clay is centered correctly on the wheel so that it can be worked without collapsing. The main tool utilized by potters is their hands. Once the clay is centered, the thumb is first used to flare the inside of the mug. Once big enough, 2 fingers are used to slowly work the walls of the mug. Finally, both hands are used to carefully form the sides of the mug. The thickness is something that is determined by the potter's intuition. Once the mug takes shape, a simple tool is used to shape the bottom. The potter stresses the side to create a unique texture, and a wire cutter is then used to break the bond with the wheel. Once complete, the mug is set aside to air dry for 4 hours. Other items are created in the same manner as the mug. Here we see the potter making a covered jar. First, the jar is made using the same technique as the mug. The clay is first centered, then worked by hand to create the desired shape. A potter uses their entire body when making a piece, keeping the hands as steady as possible to ensure the piece maintains a uniform shape. This jar will have squared corners. Calipers are used to measure the jar mouth opening. The piece is then removed from the wheel and set aside to dry. The lid is made from a smaller piece of clay. The calipers that were preset to the size of the jar are now used to ensure the lid matches that diameter. The lid is now ready to be set aside for drying. For larger items, such as bowls, the bat is changed on the wheel. Sara also uses items such as Starfish that she embeds in the wet clay to create a unique maritime pattern. Most pieces require 12 hours to dry before they can be handled. At this point, they are about as delicate as eggshells and need to be handled with care. handles are pulled from a larger piece of clay. Here, the potter beats the clay into shape and then pulls the handle pieces down before cutting them to length. The dried piece is then wetted where the handle will attach and worked into the piece with the thumb to create a permanent join. Excess clay is recycled, and each piece is then signed by hand on the bottom. Once complete, each piece must be left to dry for 2 weeks. The final pieces will be about 10% smaller once complete as the moisture is removed. Fully dried pieces are then placed in the bisque kiln and will be fired to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, which takes about 6 hours. This initial firing drives the moisture from the clay, allowing the glazing to soak in. Glaze, essentially a liquid glass, provides the final color of each object. It's mixed by hand, using a variety of natural ingredients. Each color has a unique formula that needs to be carefully measured to ensure predictable results. Each batch is carefully sifted 3 times to remove fine particles. Here, Sara is mixing Sky After Rain, a color combination that will look quite different once the piece has been fired in the kiln. Once the glaze is mixed, each piece is dusted to remove any dry clay that may have accumulated. Next, each piece is waxed on the bottom using a simple brush. The wax ensures that glaze doesn't stick to the bottom, which could cause problems during firing. The pieces are now ready to be glazed. The potter dips each piece in the glaze to ensure complete coverage. Drips and other lumps of wet glaze will smooth out during the firing. The glaze is wiped from the waxed bottoms, and any imprints, such as this starfish, are glazed using iron oxide. Sara also uses glass on some pieces to create a unique look. Here we see a comparison of a finished piece and one that is about to be fired in the kiln. Once the glaze has dried, about 24 hours later, the kiln is carefully filled with 3 layers worth of pottery. This second firing brings the kiln up to 2300 degrees over a 7-hour period. The kiln is then left to slowly cool for 24 hours before the pieces are removed. Special cones are carefully placed in the kiln that will help the potter determine when the kiln has reached its optimal temperature. Once the pottery has been carefully removed from the kilns, we see the dramatic transformation from simple clay object to a beautiful work of art that is now ready to be sold locally or shipped to customers around the world.